Chapter 4. The morning found Skye sleeping against the hill he'd come out of the night before, feeling stiff and thick-headed. It was late rather than early, the sun already halfway up the sky. It was only just reaching him through the thick branches of the trees into which many had gleefully vanished the night before. He rose, stretching and taking an assessment of himself. He was a bit damp, but the dew had already begun to dry. His belongings were intact and his clothes where they should be, if a little bloody still. He checked his arm, where he had taken the worst of the hound's teeth, and found the skin unmarked. He remembered healing of this type over there, but had not expected it here. His sword was still where it should be, and the rucksack on his back seemed unrifled. There was something about that pack he was supposed to remember. Something he had to do. He sat down again, trying to pull from his belabored brain everything that he needed to remember. There had been a woman, a rugby match, and a woman after. She'd said she'd needed him. Like a blind idiot, he'd followed and could not explain to himself then or now why. He'd had no reason to do so. Still, it begged the question, what was he supposed to do now? He had been taken for a reason. He had served his purpose, what he couldn't clearly recall, but it had to do with the sword on his back. An heirloom, he knew that. There was a fight, and a different woman, and then he was sent away. There was a keen sense of loss at that. There was another woman, that last one, not the one who had taken him, and a mission, a final task. This woman was the reason he was sent away. He had been charged with her protection. His mind suddenly flashed to a blind girl in green on the arm of a beautiful man with white hair, a man with the distinct air of the she about him. He was on his feet immediately, trying to remember where he had seen her last, when. Not that she would be there now, too much had happened since the crowning. That was it, when he had last seen her, being led away by the man in white and blue. There was a house somewhere. He could start there. He stalked around the mound and saw a faint pathway and followed it. It had all the markings of a fairy trod and was well used. It would lead somewhere useful, unless the man had taken her back into the mound and off to her lands. He curbed that thought. If he had been one of them, people here would have reacted badly. They had ways of preventing the wild hunt from riding through the fairy fort in their very backyard. They would not have allowed that to happen in their midst, not that early, before the real drinking had started. But after. He clenched his teeth and stomped towards the house whose edges he could see gleaming golden through the trees. When he rounded the wooded corner on the side of the house, he came into full view of the back of the manor. It was glorious, a true antebellum mansion in a tawny gold that caught the light just right. The view of it he had gotten by the bonfire had not done it justice. The porch stretched a good 2/3 of the back of the house and was 2 stories tall. The roof of the porch itself was a broad, sweeping balcony with 2 sets of French doors and some flowering vine potted in each corner, which spilt over the rails and cascaded a waterfall of pale blue and purple for several yards at either end. He could smell them from here. It was the occupants of the porch that caught his eye. The woman he was looking for sat, pretty as you please, in a white rocking chair with a cup of tea and a young girl beside her chattering away. As he approached, he felt any resentment toward her melt away, as he realized it was none of her fault. In fact, his brain insisted, she was just an excuse. A rescue. Something about a fight to take him kept picking at him. She had rescued him from the northern bitch. That felt odd. She turned her head towards him as his foot touched the first step. The light Irish lilt of her voice rose and fell musically, soft as a lullaby as she greeted him in Gaelic. "Top of the morning," she began. Her small nose quivered a second. "Sir?" The girl beside her clapped with glee. "How did you know it, man?" At that she seemed embarrassed. "Only men smell like that strongly." She was quick to turn back to him. "'Tis no offence I'm meaning, sir, at all, but it is what it is." She shrugged and then thoughtfully added, "Not unexpected if you slept on the lawn?" She said it as a question, asking if she was right. His mind began to fit the pieces. She was newly blind. He remembered the face of the thing that did it in a flash, managed not to flinch. She was testing new skills, trying to compensate. What was on his back was hers. He took the rucksack down and started to hand it to her, but suddenly it did not feel right. She should open it in private. If she wanted other eyes, she'd ask for them. He faltered, suddenly realizing as the girl stared at him and the woman sat with her head tilted that they were waiting for an answer. "Aye," he replied, though his voice croaked a bit, having gone suddenly dry. "Not unusual after a festival. Ain't no hardship to myself." Ian was suddenly in the open doorway, stretching for the ceiling with loud pops of bone and cartilage. He settled down with a pleased sigh. "Aye, I'll not be doubting the moment the smells of breakfast are often through yon woods there'll be many and yon young folk traipsing in from 'em. Some sheepish, others revelling in it." He seemed to make up his mind about something. "Killeen, take yourself in the house and tell Martha they're starting to drift in." She moved to obey. Ian shook his head with a grin. "Once the first souls start showing up, the rest of the army's not far behind." There was an audible growl from Skye's stomach. He had not eaten since the other side of the gate, of that he was certain. Ian looked him over critically, from the rucksack in his hand to his damp clothes and tousled hair. "I'm betting you've not had a morsel since you left the king?" At the word king, and the way he said it, Skye felt something certain and reassuring run up his back like a flag up a pole. The blind woman also reacted, pausing in her act of pouring a cup of tea by pure feel. Skye nodded. "Aye, Your Majesty." Ian growled, waved the title off with a hand that was now mostly human. "All right, first off, forget the bloody title. 'Tisn't a court or formal situation. Rarely use it outside of rituals. Name's Ian. You have to use a title out of some twist of propriety, just call me Chafe or Chieftain. Are we clear, boy?" "Aye, sir." Ian nodded, satisfied. "Now catch up with Kelly and she'll get you a room and a shower and a change. You can't come to breakfast with blood on your shirt. If you're more comfortable that way, ask her to find you a kilt. I got one or two running around the house. Yours ain't the first Highland arse I've had to clothe." Skye glanced once more at the woman he was responsible for, then nodded and headed into the house. Anne had sat quietly, listening to the conversation and trying not to be in the way. She had managed to pour a cup of the good, strong tea without spillage, though it had taken a great deal of effort. The shiver she had suppressed at the mention of the king had not helped, but she managed. She held up the bone china cup on its saucer, loving the expensive feel of it, though noting it was stronger than the delicate service she was used to with the king. She shook the wool gathering from her head and offered the chief a cup of his own tea. "Would you like a cup, sir?" She felt his gaze on her, assessing, and blushed slightly. Then he was taking the cup from her, and there was a smile in his voice. "Thank you, miss. I'm of usual a coffee drinker, but it smells like Martha got in some real Irish breakfast, not that English crap they pass for it." She heard him take Killane's abandoned seat. "So how are you settling in?" She started to fidget, uncomfortable with the situation and covered by taking another sip of tea. "Uncertain. I don't want to be anyone's burden. I'm only here because the wrath is in your backyard, and last night, well, it would have been rude. Your hospitality was pleasant, but I really must be considering my situation. I can't impose." There was something in his voice as he considered her. "And what exactly is your situation?" "Well, she sighed, set her cup down. "There's just no sugarcoating it, is there? I'm out of my time. I know that now. In a strange world, strange land. I have no papers. I'm freshly without sight or vocation, and I'll be damned if I go back to the convent." "You were a nun?" She shook her head. She stopped thinking about her answers and just let them come. Some of the cobwebs had been jarred while she slept. "Orphan, our Sisters of the Immaculate. I don't think I was with them long, but I believe I'd been educated by them prior. I could read and write both the English and the Gaelic, though I've forgotten most of my English. I know that now. Bethany helped me a lot last night, though, translating the storyteller. I was able to puzzle a rough match-up. A bit more practice, and might be I'll speak the tongue again. 'Tis been a long time." "So you escaped the convent into Faery? Bit o' a pagan trade. How'd they take you?" Of this she was certain. "Oh, they didn't take me. They hired me." "Hired you?" He seemed genuinely interested. "I had few options, you see. In my day, a village girl like myself could only become 4 things. A wife, a nun, a servant, or a governess, or a whore. I'd no dower and were fairly plain, so wife was no option. I'd not the calling for the convent, nor was I yet low enough for the last. I tried to find myself a situation. I thought I'd try governessing first, as I had some education and the work and pay would be better.
Thoughtful of you,
he said. She could smell him smoking something that did not smell like a pipe. She said nothing and continued, wanting it out while she remembered it. She took a sip of her cooling tea. There were nothing at first. Then I found an advert in the street, just blowing down the footpath as trash. Fair put me over the moon, I read it. Governess wanted, 3 children, Irish preferred. And how often did that happen this day and age, even in the Irish country? Gaelic a must. I thought it must be a trap, Gaelic being illegal and all. I only speak it 'cause my grandfer made sure it did. But I'd found nothing better, and I couldn't bear another week with the sisters. So I went. Now, I'll grant you, I wasn't told quite a few things in the beginning, like where I was to be stationed, or how long my charges would be children. Faery children are rare enough, but they don't grow fast. Though I have a theory on that I hope one day to remember. She heard him chuckle at that.
I'd like to hear it.
The rest is clouded for the nonce. I don't know why. I've no reason not to want to remember. She paused for a sip to collect the emotions threatening to overwhelm her.
Tell me more about the fur, if you can. Siblings, a name, a location.
County Clare is all I remember. There was a local lord, but he was English. I have reason to hate him, I think. She tilted her head. My father worked for him? I had siblings, but they all died. Of that I'm certain.
So, before 1893, Irish were illegal up till then, but not likely before 1830, 'cause that's when they started really cracking down.
He mused. She took a deep breath. So I'm anywhere from 179 to 116 years old.
A hefty pace,
He agreed.
You're still a wee young'un to me, though,
he added playfully, trying to cheer her.
I'm over 300 that I remember. Like as not older. Certainly not younger.
He laughed as he stretched again, and more joints creaked and popped in protest. Anne smiled, sipped her tea.
But it brings us back to your situation.
She nodded. Aye, I'm alone in a strange country, with a strange language, blind, with no skills to offer for my bread. I can't even remember enough of my life to teach Irish history, and I'd be hopeless teaching sums or spelling. I refuse to be a burden to anyone. She heard him sit up, drain his cup, and set it gently down.
I'll tell you this, lass. These are the rules and have been the 200+ years I've sat here and run the rest. You're fresh out and disoriented. You need re-educating and assimilating, and even more so in your case, and I'll begrudge you none of it. Not a morsel nor a protest, he growled as she opened her mouth to speak. My hospitality, my rules. You can help out where you're able if you wish to stay. You wish to go out on your own, I can make it happen. Otherwise, I've an entire village out there with empty houses for the likes of you and my people. I can set you up there. Most who live in the rest are family and mortal, but they understand most of the weirdness. Hell, a good chunk of them will be showing up any minute with covered dishes and grumbling bellies. I run things on the old Celtic model, like the chieftains of old. And if you can live with that, you're welcome to stay. What say ye?
I'm overwhelmed, but why? I'm neither kith nor kin. He leaned forward.
You're both, lass. You're Irish and you've no family and you're on my land. For that alone I'd take you in. You've served my king, long and well it seems by what I see hanging at your neck.
Her hand went to her throat, found a strange pendant dangling on a delicate thread of silver. It felt like 2 figures intertwined, embracing or dancing, she wasn't sure which. It felt luminous.
Didn't know about it again?
She shook her head.
Never take that off here. That there's a fairy token, and like as not will bring him to your aid on you need it. That's the older reason. Many here think I've laid like them, and stand against the gentry to protect them. I don't. I stand again all who would take the unwilling, again the Red Queen in all her bloody names. I take in those who manage to reach my wrath and protect them against those who would take them back. But I send them on when they're ready unless they swear to me and mine. Those what come from the Grafen King, they'll take as long as they'll stay. 'Cause while I'll not say thank you to the Tuatha, I'll pay it my own damn way.
She heard him stand, started out of habit to follow suit, but something in his presence made her stay put. She tipped her head up to him, trying to find his face in the darkness.
Now, I've some business needing attendance, holiday or no, and I'll leave you to the care of my house. You'll stay here in the room you were given until you decide what you'll be doing, and I'll have no more word on burdens.
He started to walk away and stopped.
Oh, and you'll be pleased to know we finally did win our independence. 'Tis the Republic of Ireland now, the Ulsters still being the bull-headed fools they allus were. They're still part of Queen country.
Something shivered into place at that phrase. Still a queen? She heard him turn.
Victoria?
He asked. She hesitated. I'm almost sure. Great imposing lady in black.
Do you remember her jubilee?
He asked hopefully. She shook her head. I don't think I'd have heard of any of her parties in the village.
He chuckled. Oh, this one you'd have heard about. So before 97, that's na help. Do you remember her husband at all?
Again, she shook her head. Albert was dead before I was born. She gave a little start as that tidbit poured from her mouth. She had not known it before she had said it. Again, Ian laughed.
Get used to it. Memories will slip in and out of you like the touch of the bird's tongue, or else they'll pounce you when you least need the distraction. But believe it or no, that helps.
And then he was gone.